Right, so if there is one person who really does sum up the abject depravity of Israeli atrocity in a way that few other Israeli politicians manage to reach, and that really is saying something, then few can hold a candle to the far-right extremist leader of the Jewish Power Party, Otzma Yehudit, Itamar Ben Gvir, having flounced out of Benjamin Netanyahu's coalition government over the agreement to the Gaza ceasefire, all despite knowing it was basically for show and to please Donald Trump. That doesn't mean Ben Gvir has gone away, however, and his particular brand of toxicity now means he has proposed legislation to annul the Oslo Accords, along with other key agreements that have shaped the framework for peace between Israelis and Palestinians. This proposal of his, if enacted, would effectively legislate Palestine out of existence, ending all cooperation, ending any prospect of a two-state solution, which so many nations still cling to, and cementing Israel's control over the occupied territories utterly. Territories they will no longer acknowledge aren't a part of Israel any longer, which would be the predictable end result in my view. Should this Bill of Ben Gvir's pass, the implications of annulling the Oslo Accords and these related protocols, alongside the devastating consequences for the Palestinian people in both Gaza and the West Bank, would be dire, to say the least. But with so much hypocrisy from global leaders who claim to support a two-state solution, while remaining appallingly silent over Israeli atrocity, would any speak out and uphold international humanitarian law as Israel essentially removed themselves from responsibility by writing Palestine out of existence? Right, so the mini-maniac Ben Gvir wants to annul the Oslo Accords, signed as they were in 93 and 95, and which were hailed as a historic breakthrough in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. They established a framework for Palestinian self-governance in parts of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and it created the Palestinian Authority, the PA, as an interim governing body, established self-rule of Palestinian territory, even as it remained under Israeli occupation, though that interim period of weeks, as was planned, has now extended to decades of existence, since it's still with us today, and too often acting as skivvies for Israel at that. That aside, though, the Accords were based on a principle of land for peace, with the expectation that further negotiations would end up leading to a final resolution of the Israel-Palestine conflict, including the establishment of that all-important independent Palestinian state alongside Israel. Something, of course, that we know, sadly, still has not happened. Anyway, Itamar Ben Gvir's proposal to annul the Oslo Accords represents a shift in Israel more depraved than possibly anything they've tried previously in recent months. But the Oslo Accords gave the occupied Palestinian territory some semblance of self-rule and organisation. The annulment of them would reverse it all, essentially writing Palestine as we know it out of existence. What Ben Gvir has introduced is a bill in the Knesset that would not only revoke the Oslo Accords, but also annul the Hebron Agreement of 1997 and the Wye River Memorandum of 1998 out as well, both of which were designed to implement and expand upon the provisions of the Oslo Accords. The Hebron Agreement divided the city of Hebron in the West Bank into Israeli and Palestinian-controlled areas, whilst the Wye River Memorandum outlined further Israeli withdrawals from the West Bank. I'll come back to these in a moment, though. Ben Gvir's rhetoric accompanying the proposal leaves little room for ambiguity, though. He's a pretty nailed-on sort of chap. This is my insane idea. This is the depravity to which I stoop. This is the gutter I frequent. Choose your own analogy. He's a bottom-feeding extremist. So he has decided to describe the Oslo Accords as a disaster. It's a disaster in his view for Israel, and has called for the complete annexation of the West Bank, effectively ending any possibility of a Palestinian state. This stance aligns with the ideology of the Otzma Yehudit party itself, of course, which advocates for the expansion of Israeli sovereignty over all of historic Palestine and opposes any form of Palestinian self-determination. They are absolutely part of the problem, never the solution. So in his eyes, these accords are a disaster, but only because that's the warped belief of the party he leads. However, the annulment of the Oslo Accords and related agreements would actually be a disaster for the Palestinian people most of all. First and foremost, it would eliminate the legal and political framework for Palestinian self-governance. It would be gone. It would leave the Palestinian Authority, therefore, without any kind of a mandate to operate. What a reward for them for services rendered to Israel, but more fool them if they thought bowing to Israel would win them favour. You're Palestinians. When that in and of itself is your crime, there's no making up for that with Israel. This would, of course, probably lead to the collapse of the PA, creating a power vacuum in the West Bank that Israel would exploit, de facto annexing the whole of the West Bank into Israeli control, just like that. Israel's annexation of the West Bank, leaving just Gaza, which Israel is already breaching a ceasefire over and has plans to ethnically cleanse, would effectively render the two-state solution completely obsolete and Palestine a memory. The Oslo Accords were based on the premise that the West Bank and Gaza Strip would eventually become part of an independent Palestinian state. So by revoking these agreements, Israel will be signalling its intent to permanently end that idea and Israel's alleged support for it. This annulment would also exacerbate the humanitarian crisis in those occupied territories. The Oslo Accords established mechanisms for cooperation between Israel and the PA on all manner of issues, from security to economic development to the provision of basic services. Without those mechanisms, all of that gone too, Palestinians would face even greater restrictions on their movements, access to resources, their ability to build a sustainable economy would be stymied. In short, if you thought Israel was an apartheid state before, you probably haven't seen anything yet. The Hebron Agreement and the Wye River Memorandum, as aforementioned, are integral parts of the Oslo process as well. The Hebron Agreement, as I said, divided the city of Hebron, which had become a flashpoint of tensions between Israelis and Palestinians, into two zones, H1 controlled by the PA and H2 controlled by Israel. This arrangement, not perfect, has helped to maintain a fragile peace in one of the most volatile areas of the West Bank. Therefore, annulling that agreement would likely lead to a lot more renewed violence and complete instability in that city. The Wye River Memorandum, signed in 1998, outlined further Israeli withdrawals from the West Bank and established mechanisms for security cooperation between Israel and the PA. It also included provisions for greater cooperation going forwards between the two. Interestingly, both of these additional agreements were negotiated between the PLO leader Yasser Arafat and Benjamin Netanyahu. So this would be Netanyahu revoking agreements he himself implemented, in which case I wonder how he'll respond to that. Well, I think we can probably guess, can't we? Anyway, revoking the Wye River Memorandum would undermine these gains, further entrench Israel's control over those occupied territories as well, as would the Hebron Agreement. Ben Gvir's proposal, therefore, represents the effective end of the two-state solution, a goal that has been endorsed by the international community for decades, envisaging an independent Palestinian state alongside Israel with borders based on the 1967 lines and mutually agreed land swaps. Whilst the feasibility of this solution has been, well, let's put it politely, shall we, increasingly questioned in recent years, as it damn well should have been, Israel are no longer even pretending to be going along with it, to be on side with it. Certainly not Ben Gvir with his bill. Yet it still remains the only internationally recognised framework for resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. So the annulment of the Oslo Accords and those other related agreements would render the two-state solution impossible. It would leave Palestinians with no viable path to statehood anymore. It would leave them with no land of their own going forwards, as Israel presumably just assimilates what remains. Well, who's going to stop them after all? Whoever stands against Israel when it counts. This would not only be a betrayal of the Palestinian people, but also a blow to the credibility of the international community, which has repeatedly affirmed its commitment to a two-state solution, but which I bet my bottom dollar not one of them lifts a finger to defend when it counts. Ben Gvir's proposal has won strong support, however, as you might have guessed, from the Israeli settler movement, which views the Oslo Accords as an obstacle to the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. Settlers have long opposed any form of Palestinian self-governance. They see it as a threat to their goal of annexing the entire West Bank and Gaza for them to occupy and settle in. By revoking the Oslo Accords, Ben Gvir's bill would pave the way for the legalisation of more of those settlements, legalised in Israel, as much as they would be clearly illegal beyond Israel's borders. And the consolidation of Israeli control over those occupied territories will be even more nailed on. The settler movement's support for Ben Gvir's Otzma Yehudit party underscores the growing influence of far-right ideologies in Israeli politics and how much more far-right they're getting. Ben Gvir's rise to power reflects a broader shift towards extremism in Israeli society. Far-right parties have gained traction by appealing to nationalist and religious sentiments. The fact that Otzma Yehudit's party, parent party, they splintered off from the religious Zionist party of Bezalel Smotrich, which now holds Netanyahu's grasp on power in their hands, only goes to underline this thinking. Compromise has gone out of the window as Israel has increasingly embraced hardline unilateralism. Itamar Ben Gvir's proposal and his bill is a dangerous and reckless move that threatens to plunge Palestine into even greater turmoil. But this is a guy that seems to get off on that. By legislating Palestine out of existence, Ben Gvir's bill would deny Palestinians their right to self-determination and entrench Israel's control over the occupied territories. It would also mark the end of the two-state solution. There would be no argument about that. It would be dead. Leaving the international community without a viable framework for peace they'd have to start again and get thinking again. And this story, as you might have guessed, for all the consequences I've gone over, is going completely unreported outside of foreign media. I guarantee you won't have heard a thing about this today, and that doesn't just say everything, because this story is absolutely massive in my view, because who would bet against Ben Gvir's bill passing in the Knesset? Meanwhile, in regards to potentially ending the ceasefire in Gaza, the appointment of a really hardline warmonger with close ties to Netanyahu himself to the post of Chief of Staff signals plans by Israel to start all over again there. They can annex the West Bank overnight, it seems, with this bill of Ben Gvir's passing on the face of it, but they still have a fight on their hands in Gaza, and it looks like they might be preparing for it too. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here as your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe so you don't miss out on all new content published daily, as well as supporting the channel at the same time, which is very much appreciated, holding power to account for ordinary working class people, and I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers folks.